Mike Sachs is a hybrid published humorist with multiple novels and collaborations under his belt. He'd been contributing humor pieces to national magazines and papers for a number of years before truly hitting his stride. As a student of comedy, his epiphany moment was realizing that for legends like George Carlin and Richard Pryor, it was only when they dropped the pretense and became themselves that their careers truly took off. Since that time, he's been focused on projects that are purely for his own joy and benefit. When he self-published Stinker Lets Loose, a 1970s trucker satire, he couldn't have predicted that someone would produce that idea into an audiobook starring Jon Hamm. To learn more about Mike Sachs, writing comedy and satire, and learning from the greats, be sure to listen to today's episode of the Fearless Storyteller podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Fearless Storyteller podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Freckleton. Have you ever noticed how fear stops us from creating and sharing our best work? Join the Fearless Storyteller as we explore the heart and soul of writing stories, songs, and scripts that sell with the people who write them. Each guest has their own unique hero's journey and insights into the intersections between limiting beliefs and success. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to leave a review on your favorite podcatcher of choice. Also, be sure to check out the show notes for a link to the Patreon offerings. We've got some good ones for you. Thanks so much for being a listener and supporter of the show. Enjoy today's interview. I listened to your remastered David Sedaris episode of your podcast last night.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's been a while now.
I imagine so. It's
I was sort of in a bad way at that time period, and I was, truth be told, a bit drunk when I interviewed him. I had gone drinking before I met up with him. Yeah, we had been friendly before, so it wasn't like I had never met him. But I think that interview was a bit looser than it would have been if I were to do it now.
It kind of had the green room feel to it.
I'm sure it did.
And I wonder what happens when you're drinking and you're interviewing somebody and they bring up their sobriety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
what happens at that point?
Right. It's happened to me a few times. I truthfully just like to be honest about it. I think that makes the interview adds more depth. I think people can tell when you're bullshitting. Maybe I sometimes tell people too much, about various things. I've talked about the medicine I'm on and the exact dosage and all that. And my father was sort of taken aback by it. He came from the generation where you don't say anything. I come from the generation where you never shut the fuck up. So I'm not sure if there's a middle ground. I might want to lean more towards that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we've entered into the era where, for the moment, we are our own gatekeepers, and there's no real precedent for that.
It's uncharted territory.
Yeah, and I can see, as an author, writes sci-fi, I could project out, scenarios where that would be disadvantageous for you to disclose that kind of information.
Well, that's the thing. I do think and feel strongly that this is the best time to be a young writer because there's more opportunity than there ever has been in history. At the same time, there's more at stake and there's more that can go wrong and the margin of error is a lot thinner. So you do have to take that into consideration. I mean, there is, you can be a starting writer. You can have as many readers as any publication out there. Which never existed in the past. When I was starting out, it was zines, it was Xerox zines, and you put it in Tower Records. Now you can have as many readers as the New Yorker has potentially.
Yeah.
But it comes with the negative aspect is sometimes a lot of people aren't ready with their writing toolbox and also with the knowledge of what of the power of the written word. And I think a lot of people learn to their detriment pretty quickly.
Well, before we go any further with that, because I can see you're just ready to jump off into the deep end here. Mike Sachs, welcome to the Fearless Storyteller podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and one of my canned questions is, I like to let my guests introduce themselves. So, like, what would you like to share about yourself for the audience?
Wow. Okay. Well, it doesn't seem so long ago that I was starting off, and I do like to help younger writers. I guess there are two ways you can take it. You can say, well, no one helped me when I was starting off, so I'm not going to help anyone. Or you can say, no, I would like to, no one helped me, so I'd like to help those. It was a mystery to me. I didn't know from it. I didn't know any writers. I didn't know anyone who knew any writers. It was just a total mystery. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have to be a mystery. And I think there are some things you can do and not do to help your chances.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. And I wouldn't get from that answer that you had anything to do with, comedy or anything. I just get that you're a cool dude who's done some work. And
well, I think everyone has to work, and that's one of the things I didn't know necessarily. I thought it would be a lot of fun, and it is fun, but you're off the beaten track, you're on your own, and really in the end you do have to work very hard.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to, I think the most I ever made per hour for writing was in college at the college newspaper as a managing editor, and we had so much fun. And
that's why people go into it. They want to have fun. And
we never had enough people submitting articles on time, so we had to make things up,
You mean like Fox News, that sort of?
Yeah, well, probably more like The Onion, right? Like we just make things up and make up fake ads because we didn't get enough ads either.
Well, that is, where did you go to school?
Well, this was in community college my first 2 years. So in Bellevue, Washington. Bellevue's like the angry stepchild of Seattle.
Well, I'm a big proponent of community colleges. I think that in a lot of times, especially when it comes to writing, you're being taught by people who make a living at it, who are out there hustling, as opposed to tenured professors in big universities who do not have to go out there and hustle to get an agent, to get an editor, to get published. I think there's an advantage to taking courses from those who are also out there struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. So you write, you're a writer, and if people looked you up, they'd find out pretty quickly that your name is associated with a lot of humor work as well. Or else they'd be perhaps greatly horrified by what they found. I don't know. But I'm joking.
I hope they maybe would be a little horrified.
Well, I'm personally most curious by the the take on sex, Our Bodies, Our Junk, written with the Pleasure Syndicate.
Yes. Well, that was I wanted to write a fake sex manual, and like real sex, I needed some help. So I went out to some friends who I have written with over the years, including writers for Daily Show, The Onion, and Bob's Burgers and all that. And, we wrote together, we've written together over the years as sort of a writing group. So I guess that came out about 10 years ago, where we spent about 6 months writing it, and it came out through Random House. And it's really a book written by an association. It's called the Association for the Betterment of Sex down in Washington, D.C. It's pretty clear.
So was it a public, like a PAC? Was that the intention?
No, it was more of an association where people would pay these gentlemen for their knowledge. Hopefully it's pretty clear these guys really don't know much about sex.
Great. And so I noticed like a through line on a lot of your books, early work, you interview people, you do these collections. There's a lot of collaboration and kind of enlisting people who are also working professionals. And how did you end up on that avenue?
I think it's an important thing. One of the things that I wish I had changed when I first started was to collaborate more. and to open myself up, I looked at it as being a competition, where it was almost like a tennis match where it was me against another person. It's not like that. You really do have to open yourself up to experiences and to other people, because your experience will grow and also your comedy will get better. And that's really where we first start liking comedy, is fooling around with your friends, making your friends laugh, making others laugh. To be too enclosed is to circle the drain, and I think you lose touch with what is possible. So to me, the best comedy is usually working with others. That can be taken to the other extreme, where there's too much input from too many people and it becomes sort of bland. But if you have people that you like working with, I highly recommend that, because really, especially if you're just starting out, those are the people who will hire you down the road to write for magazines, for TV, and to write for movies and other things. It's not necessarily, you're not going to be picked off the top of a CV pile. It'll be, oh, I worked with so-and-so back in the day, and they were easy to work with, and they were fun to work with. Let's pull him or her aboard. And that's really the way it works out there. So I would highly recommend it. Now, the problem is finding people who are on your same sensibility, wavelength if you're writing comedy. But once you do find those people, I think it's important to maintain that relationship and to sort of trust them that the betterment of the product is really the main point, not an ego. So if someone has a joke and the rest don't like it, it's not something one should get down about. As a professional, you want it to read the best it can read, and you have to put that behind you. What's most important really is just maintaining that writing relationship. And if that has to, if it has to do with a joke that you're happy with, if they're not happy with, I would highly recommend you just let it go.
So I imagine to be able to pull that off, you'd have to have maybe some sort of shared perspective on what you think the outcomes of your project are and why you're doing it.
Right? Well, absolutely. Without a doubt. Yeah.
And so, where were your expectations set when you kind of started a project like that?
Well, you never know exactly where it's going to go. You don't want to know exactly where it's going. That's why I'm not a big proponent of outlining. But what you do know is that you all share the same humor sensibility. Hopefully you all have the same humor IQ, and that you don't know exactly how it's going to look or end, but you know that you'll all be happy with the product that you yourself and the rest of the group would have enjoyed. And that's really all you can hope for, is that you're working with people who get it. And in this case, get it is just get your sensibility and sense of humor. It's a rare thing to find that. I think a lot of people, including myself, grew up with a lot of friends who may not have gotten your sense of humor, or may not have liked the movies you liked or the books you liked, especially if you went into comedy professionally. So I do think it's important. And the most important thing is just to have a similar outlook. I mean, it's like getting into any romantic relationship. You don't know how it's going to end. You kind of hope for the best and know that there are more similarities and differences, and you just hope it works out.
Yeah. And were any of you thinking, oh, we're going to do this and it's going to be a bestseller? Or were you thinking this is, we're going to have a good time and we're going to make this?
No, it was never, ever about a bestseller. I think if you think that way, I think it's delusional in comedy, especially, we're knowledgeable enough to know that our sense of humor may not be the type you're going to see on Oprah or in an airport bookstore. What was most important to us was to put out a product we were happy with, and quite frankly, to be paid for it. So the advance was good. We had full realm, full control. And as far as it doing well, we would only hope that it would do, a quarter of what an Onion book would do. But you never know how it's going to do. And to think that it's going to be a hit, sometimes you don't want a comedic hit, because a comedic hit for a book is a quickie book sometimes that goes bad very quickly, whether it's about Trump, current events, or cats versus dogs, or any of that. Sometimes you want to avoid a hit like that.
Right. So something that can get dated quickly, or...
Right. And I think, what I grew up liking was not, I remember coming across books of Art Buchwald's column in the library a few years after they were published, and they might as well have been published 1,000 years ago. And then coming across books that were written 1,000 years ago, Aristophanes and plays that were comedic, that because they were character based, to me seemed fresher. And to me, that became an important thing, is not to become dated and to put out something that's character. I mean, everything is going to be dated, of course, but why pigeon yourself? Why paint yourself into the corner when there's enough you have to worry about? And I prefer to keep it open-ended.
Well, so it sounds like by this point you've hit your stride in a way, even if the results, I don't know where the results were by that point for your career, but like, why, I guess backing up, like why did you get into writing? Was it writing first or comedy, getting to comedy first and writing was a way to get there, or like, how did you end up?
I wasn't a good student, and what I enjoyed didn't have to do with school. It had to do with books, movies, pop culture, and comedy. And, my dream was to write for David Letterman, and I didn't know how to do it. So the only way that I felt I could do it was to write for myself, write for the page. I couldn't write for TV as a 15-year-old or movies, so I just started writing, and it worked out where my preference is for the written page, actually. It's really the wrong way to go about doing it. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, I looked at it as being like baseball, where you get called up from the minor leagues if someone notices your work, and then you end up writing for TV. It's not the way it works, but I didn't know that at the time. But it did provide me with a good background. I started writing pretty early. So by the time I was in my mid-20s, I had been doing it for 10 years, which I think is what you need to discover your own voice and to determine what works and what doesn't work. I think it's very, very important. I don't think there's any other way to do that than to just sit down and write. And if that is a problem for you, writing may not be your vocation.
Yeah, and I'm going to assume if you just started sitting down and writing at 15, that you were consuming a lot of things, like your taste was being informed by something along
It was really very particular. I mean, what I liked, I didn't like a lot of things, but what I liked, I really liked. And, whether it was Letterman or Albert Brooks or David Sedaris or Merrill Markoe, Dorothy Parker, early National Lampoon, Mad Magazine. It's just stuff that I came upon and really liked. So if I was influenced by anything, it was really not the things taught in school, but the things I was reading to avoid school.
That makes sense. And like, you started writing and you were informed by what you were reading and what you enjoyed. And why did you keep up with it? Was it just something like, what were you getting out of it that was of value to keep going with it?
I don't know. In retrospect, I mean, I had a whole closet full of they sent rejection letters back then. It wasn't an email. I don't know why. I mean, I don't know if it was stubbornness or literally having, I worked retail for 10 years, so I could have done other things, and I did do other things, but the one thing I did want to do was basically just be left alone to write. And I didn't know how to go about it. So that was really the voyage, as they say. And that's something you have to teach yourself. And no teacher can tell you what is going to happen. I mean, you're really off the beaten track, and the highs are going to be high and the lows are going to be low. But really the trick is just to keep moving forward and hope something happens.
Yeah. Like, how did you even know to submit to things? Like, you must have been like doing some research and been pretty driven.
It was mostly interviews with writers talking about their beginnings, whether it was, E.B. White or writers for New Yorker or writers for National Lampoon or Mad. I would just read what they said and what they did. Now, this would take place 30, 40 years before I came on, but I assumed the process wasn't too different. I mean, no one sat down and said, you have to do this, you have to do that. But you learn pretty quickly what works and what doesn't work once you start receiving rejections. and also some acceptances. It's really just a matter of figuring it out for yourself. But it really did come from learning from others who had made it. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to put out a book of interviews with more recent comedy writers to find out what worked for them and what didn't work for them. And hopefully help those who are just beginning, who may not know the route to take or what to do or what not to do. I mean, really, the perfect reader for me when I put out these interview books was someone skipping math class in the high school library and just coming across it and just thinking, okay, this is my future. This is my destiny. Is this sort of life? You know, it's not going to be much money necessarily, but it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think that there's like a clear moment where you shifted from being an amateur to a professional?
Well, I don't know when that moment would have come. I mean, when I first started getting published, it was mostly free. I wasn't being paid. So I don't even know if would have been looked at as being a professional. I mean, there were certain instances where I felt that I had broken through and felt that I had figured something out to improve the writing. And that to me meant more than making money on a certain piece. Because I've written a lot of pieces that I don't like that I was paid for, and a lot of pieces that I've written I love that I wasn't paid for. To me, what's important is to put out what you want, how you want to do it. And it did take me a while to get to that point.
Would you have even known what you wanted early on when you were doing those pieces?
No, I don't think so. I think the toolbox is so sparse when you first start off. I don't even think you know what you want. I mean, I think you know what you like, but I don't know if you know how to get there. And that really just comes through trial and error. My big breakthrough really was, I'm not going to write like a New Yorker writer. I'm not going to write like S.J. Perelman. I'm not going to write like Groucho Marx. I write as a suburbanite outside D.C. and Maryland and Virginia, and that's growing up in the 80s and 90s, and that's what I know, and you can't fake it. And really, in the end, the jokes are just, you just want to put them in a Trojan horse and get it through. So I spent too much time on what does is it a well-written sentence? Would my English teachers like? In the end, that really doesn't matter. I mean, your style comes about through your comedy, and you have to get it across as seamlessly as possible. So once I figured that out, it became a lot easier and more fun.
It sounds like you're taking the pressure off of yourself.
Well, you do, yeah, exactly. You have to. You can't put too much pressure. It's hard enough, but really put it out there in your own style, and because otherwise it sounds fake, it reads fake, and you're not. Everyone's style is basically what you are not capable of doing, and I wasn't capable of doing a lot. And that's just what your style becomes, and you have no choice, really. I mean, you are who you are. Your sensibility is who your sensibility is, and if you fake it, it's, especially in comedy, it's going to be very apparent.
Yeah, but then you have to like embrace the fact that you're just kind of who you are already, and
right. Well, that's just it.
You can't keep putting it off, right, and striving for something at that point.
I mean, David Sedaris is David Sedaris. I couldn't be David Sedaris. I mean, he's a genius, and he is, he is alone in who he is. I would love to be him, but I'm not. And I think a lot of people try to be something or someone they are not. And when you really look at the best comedy, especially stand-ups, whether it's Richard Pryor or any of these stand-ups, they really started to fly once they became true to themselves and dropped the pretense, whether it was George Carlin dropping the hippy-dippy weatherman persona and becoming who he was, Richard Pryor telling stories about growing up in Ohio. I mean, that is really when they reached cruising altitude. And that to me was another lesson, in that you have to really just sort of get within yourself and put out what you are and who you are and the truth. And whether you're from the suburbs or from the inner city, or you're from, Canada or New Orleans, it doesn't matter. Just use what you have to the best of your ability, because that is who you are. You have no choice. You can't redo your childhood.
Mm.
You can't redo your early adulthood. I mean, that's just who you are.
Well, you could try if you just write middle grade and YA as a career.
Well, quite frankly, a lot of comedy writers do rewrite their childhoods, and especially their adolescent, because a lot of it's bullshit. Like whether it's Animal House or any of these movies, you can sort of sense they're rewriting what they wanted their childhood or teenagehood to have been like. And I think a lot of it is nonsense. I mean, that's why when you see honesty, whether it's Freaks and Geeks or anything about honest childhood, to me that rings more true than other type of stories, which to me read more like fantasy or science fiction.
Yeah, I've been noticing like this creeping in, like with like say shows on Netflix in the last year or two, more of shows leaning into the awkward real moments, like people who are having exceptional stories and exceptional things happen to them, but having these very grounded moments from real life brought into it.
Well, yeah. I mean, you look at a show like Pen 15. Have you seen that show?
No.
It's a work of genius. I mean, it's amazing what these two have done, these two actresses. It's so honest. I mean, it's so honest to the point where I've watched it with female friends and they couldn't watch it. It was too painful.
Mm-hmm.
It's real honesty. And it's really honest and there's no bullshit. And to me,
yeah.
I was never a girl. I never went through female adolescence, but to me, I can sympathize with it because you see the characters are so strong and the stories are so deep and resonates that that humor becomes that much more powerful. I mean, to me, it's one of the best shows of the last decade.
Pen 15.
It's on Hulu.
On Hulu. Okay, that's why I haven't heard of it. It just made me think of, saying the painful bit, like, I mean this lightly, but it's also true. Like, I remember trying to watch Portlandia with my wife back, and she couldn't watch it because it's too realistic. It's kind of,
that's the thing.
These are people we know. We know these people,
Well, that's the thing. I have been to Portland. I never lived there. I don't know the area well, but I love that show because to me, I sensed it was tethered to something very real.
Yeah.
And what it was making fun of was a subject matter and a group that the writers and actors knew very well. I don't always get that sense. I mostly don't get that sense from comedies. But when it works, that's what you want to feel.
I'm glad you bring that up because, I was listening to like I mentioned, I was listening to your chat with David Sedaris, and you kind of got into this conversational section. I don't want to play that out. We can have a new conversation, but, he was talking about a joke that didn't work and he got feedback on, and he kind of changed his mind about whether it was a, good joke. Right. And like the idea of, should we be telling jokes that are offensive, and should we care when we offend other people, right? Like there's kind of an interesting dynamic in comedy where you understand your subtext and what you're going for, hopefully, and the people, depending on how you execute it, people may or may not feel like it's funny or appropriate, right? Like underpinning this whole journey of being a comedy writer is that reality that you may be crucified for what you say.
Right. And I think that's why a lot of people in comedy go sort of crazy, because you can be in comedy writing for 50 years and you still don't know what the reaction is going to be. Which
it feels like your career could end at any time, right?
It could end, especially these days. But I don't know if I brought this out with David at that point. I've talked about it other times, is I think, audiences, readers, whomever, are not going to like every joke you do. And they may be offended in certain instances, but I think as long as they know that you were on the right path, that your lodestar was directed towards goodness and not meanness, I think then you should, as a reader or as a viewer or whomever, accept that sort of thing. Not every joke is going to work, but I think if the creator's intention was obviously for good, whether it's satirizing this or satirizing that. And even if they come out against something where you know that they were actually for something, I think if you realize that their heart is in the right place, then it should be accepted.
Yeah.
But if you do see something that is told out of meanness or spite or ignorance or racism or what misogyny or what have you, then that is what I have a problem with, not that a joke didn't work dealing with a complicated subject.
Yeah, but that's a tricky evolving target, I would imagine, especially just as you grow as a person, right? Like,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's if you're going to deal with human emotions and issues, you're going to tread across some subject matter that might offend certain people. I mean, the times have changed. You see how satire was dealt in the early 70s with National Lampoon, where they would have this very, very slash and burn, hard-hitting satire. I don't think that would be accepted today, even if people felt their hearts were in the right places. So there are different things that one has to keep aware of, but I don't think that should stop you from moving forward as a writer and discussing things that bother you.
Yeah.
And maybe doing that in a satirical way that not everyone understands.
Well, maybe let's ground this a little bit. Like, how, like, when have you really had to deal with this? Where I imagine there was a point where maybe you wrote something down and thought it was funny and maybe worried about what people were going to think, versus when you're more mid-career and you're getting reactions, right?
Right. Well, I'll give you a specific example. When I first started off, I wrote a piece in the voice of a upper class critic who was reviewing homeless people and grading them on their outfits and on their ability to earn money. And obviously the whole point was that me, almost being homeless myself, it bothered me very much when I would read and see people's reaction to the homeless. But I sent that piece out, and it was sometimes mistaken for me actually reviewing homeless people.
Right.
So in retrospect, it was a little too National Lampoon. It was a little too immature. But to this day, one of the things I do like to do is to write under the character of another author, usually a pretty bad author. So it makes it easier for me to write, whether it's a fake novelization or a fake memoir or a fake this or a fake that. And oftentimes people will confuse what I write under that character with my feelings as a writer. Or, I can write a character that I don't like. And to me, this character might represent a Trumper.
Yeah.
And I've been, people have sort of mistaken me as condoning that sort of behavior, where that is not that wasn't my intention. But, I think when you do write certain things, you don't want to be too clear. You want to be a little behind the scenes. I especially like hiding behind characters. So if people are going to be upset by that, to me, that's fine, because I do feel at this point that I have enough in my toolbox to put it out there the way I want it to read. And if they don't get it, if they confuse me with the character, then that's more on them than it is on me.
Yeah, and that's going to happen. So but now I imagine what jumps out to me when you're talking about that is, just from a writer perspective, I'm wondering, so when you're doing that and you're putting yourself into the shoes of somebody you may disagree with, is this the protagonist in your story or a side character?
Well, in one case, I put out a book called Randy, and it's actually going to be re-released from Simon & Schuster in February. And that was, I supposedly found this memoir and bought it at a garage sale, and I was republishing it. But it was really about this awful character named Randy who lives in the suburbs of Maryland, quite similar to a lot of people I grew up with, but in the eyes of a memoirist. And hopefully it was clear through the asides from the memoir writer about Randy that he didn't like this guy, but had to pretend that he did.
He created a little distance there.
Right. You do have to create some distance. I mean, I think that was the problem with Andrew Dice Clay when he would go up there and tell jokes in this, even if it was under a character guise. He would, I remember one joke he told about convenience store clerks being the color of urine. And it wasn't the joke that bothered, it was the joke that bothered me, but it was also the audience's reaction, because when he was at Madison Square Garden telling this joke, when he got a standing ovation, they weren't applauding his character and the satire behind the character. They were applauding the joke.
Yeah.
And to me,
that requires its own examination. Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think that's misguided comedy. I don't think at any time should a character like that, working in a convenience store and being a foreigner, why go after that type of character? I mean, there's so many type of characters one can go after.
Yeah.
And I think, that's my favorite type of character to go after, is one who deserves it. And hopefully all the characters that I've written in a fake positive light come across as deserving their fate and deserving the way we look down on them.
Yeah. And, I personally, my own approach, right, is the best way for me to punch, go after a character is to get inside their head, right? Like, because otherwise you're just kind of hitting, I don't know, just a caricature, right? Or, I think that's one of the powers of written word, is that you can actually get in somebody's head and examine why they do what they do, and maybe question their assumptions with the scenarios you put them in.
You have to get in their head. You have to. I mean, otherwise it won't be effective. And I'm all for getting in other people's heads, even if they're bad people. I mean, I like characters that are not likable, but are strangely likable because you feel sorry for them. That to me is my favorite type of character. They're not bad people, but you wouldn't want to go on a camping trip with them necessarily. But in order to get the jokes across and the character across, you do have to understand them. Yeah. And I see nothing wrong with understanding people who are not always nice or don't always agree with what we agree with as writers.
Yeah. And so what do you, like, this conversation comes up in comedy, is the only place I really hear it in comedy writing, is the concept of punching up.
Right.
What does that mean to you? And like, how do you feel? What's your perspective on that?
Well, I feel the perfect example is the Andrew Dice Clay joke. When he's talking about a foreigner working in a convenience mart and being a different color, it's not, to me, it's smart humor. And that, to me, you should really go after those worthy of going after. And someone working for $6 an hour trying to better their lives and their kids' lives, I don't see the comedic purpose of that, the satirical purpose. I think if, it was a character who was ignorant and was an American, ignorant about foreigners, that to me would interest me more than just going after foreigners. There's so much out there that's wrong with the world. I don't think comedy is ever going to solve it, but I do think that it's a powerful tool that you have to use on those who are worthy of its treatment, worthy of receiving it. And I don't think a convenience store worker, that to me would be punching down. Now, punching up would be going after Mitch McConnell, or going after someone who may not even be in a position of power, but who likes Mitch McConnell.
Yeah.
Who may not understand the ignorance of a lot of things. I think there's a lot of ignorance one can go after, and why waste time on going after those who don't deserve it? I don't. I'm always angry watching the news. Why would you not want to go after certain people? Yeah. It'd be like picking on a puppy or something. Like, why do it? It's just a waste of time. There's no purpose to it. And the best comedy has always been going after those who are worthy of being mocked. Yeah. And it's always been those in power, those with money, those with ignorance.
Yeah. And sometimes we can.
Never been.
Yeah.
There's never been the underdog. There's no reason to go after the underdog.
I think there's a certain safety maybe in like going after our younger selves, right?
Sure, absolutely, because that ties in with going after people who might think they know more than they do.
Mm.
And I can certainly go after my earlier self because my heart may have been in the right place, but I didn't know as much as I probably thought I did.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, I think going after yourself is always fine, but there's no reason to be a bully. And I've seen it in comedy where there are bullies, and some people like it, but I don't. And I think that the best comedy is never hurtful uh, towards those who are vulnerable,
Mm.
and I just see no purpose in it.
Yeah. So I'm gonna segue a little bit. Like you've done novelizations as well that are kind of satirical, right? And one I'm looking at is Stinker Lets Loose, right? And I have a couple thoughts about questions about that. Like one is how do you decide like what, because you must get a lot of ideas. How do you decide what project merits moving forward with and investing a lot of effort into? Like
Uh,
at this
well,
point, I
yeah,
imagine that's evolved over time, like how you choose. But
it's a strange thing. Yeah, I'll come up with an idea, I'll put it away, and if I come back to it and it still interests me, and if I feel it's worthy of working on for 6 months or so, then I'll continue with it. Some things I just have to get out.
mm-hmm.
Um, I do know at this point that if I do work on it, it's going to be a months long process. Some ideas to me are worthy of that, and some others aren't. I mean, it's almost like feeling an idea in your hand. Certain ideas have weight, and for some reason, Stinker Lets Loose, which is based on an imaginary 1977 trucking and CB movie, it just was something I wanted to do.
Right.
Um, I just felt that it was the right time to do it. I hadn't seen anything done on that era, and I felt that this character sort of was connected to the present day, and it just seemed like a fun thing. And also, quite frankly, at that time, I had been writing a lot of pieces for magazines that I wasn't happy with that had been edited or rewritten about current events. So I just wanted to do something that was purely for my own joy and benefit,
Mm.
and not for something, not for money, and not for anything really, but just to put it out there the way I wanted it to be. And then it was a good lesson because I did that, and then it became an audio book with John Hamm playing Stinker and Ray Seahorn from Better Call Saul and Paul F. Tompkins and Andy Richter. So when you put out something that you like, that's individual, and you're not doing it just to get readers or to get money, a lot of
Yeah.
times good things can happen from that.
Well, and maybe so. I love that you talk about like linked that you did something purely for your own joy, and then it had these unintended consequences that were pretty awesome. And maybe for the audience's benefit, talk more about like how did this audiobook version come about?
Well, okay, well it was interesting when it happened because I didn't expect it. I put the book out there. I self-published it, which is another advantage to writers today. You don't have to get an agent. You don't have to wait 2 years to get published with a humor book. You can put something out next week, and
Mm-hmm.
if you do it properly, which is get it designed and write it well and edit it well. So that's what I decided to do. I was going to put out my own book, and if 15 people came across it, or 1,000, or 10,000, it didn't really even matter. I just wanted that product, something tangible, out in the world that I was happy with.
Mm.
And when you do that, good things tend to happen. So I put the book out. I sent it out, advertising it, not advertising, but talking about it on an email list that I've kept over the years. And one of the recipients was a guy named Eric Martin, who is an audio producer of books. And he got in touch with me and said, can I have the rights to this, to put it out as an audio book? Now, I really didn't think much about it. And I said, sure, go ahead. I didn't ask for money. I just said, that's fine. If you can do that, that would be great.
Mm.
Not expecting anything. And then, within the month, it was sold to Audible. And then John Hamm came aboard. And then others started coming aboard. And it doesn't take much for something good to happen if it exists. If I had pitched this, it would have been purchased. But if I had something to show to people, this is done, they like that more. And it was a good lesson for me that sometimes too much time is spent on pitching rather than just doing what you want to do. And if it takes 6 months, sometimes it's worth just doing it, just to have something on your shelf, on your shelves, or something you can send to someone that they can hold in their hands and read. And it was because I did that and produced it and put it out there that audiobook was made. And then because of that audiobook, then another audiobook came across, and then another one. So things started happening because of that.
That's pretty cool. And you ended up, I don't know that you have much of a relationship with John Hamm, but you ended up using his headshot.
Yeah, no, I don't. I know him very, very not well at all. He's a super nice guy. I've emailed him just a few times, and I did email him asking him if he would be on the cover for my book Poking a Dead Frog, which was a collection of interviews with comedy writers, and he very nicely said yes. So a friend of mine who's a photographer photographed him one day, and he did all these poses, and the publisher turned out to not want him on the cover for some reason, the world's best looking man. So I went back to John and said, I'm so sorry. We can't put you on the cover. They don't want you on the cover, but I have an idea. Would you pose for my author shot? And I mean, can we use one of the photos for my author shot? And he said, sure. Which I love, because I never really understand author photos. To me, especially when you look like myself, there's no purpose to them. It's not going to sell books. But if you have someone like John Hamm pretending to be you, to me, that's the perfect antidote, because he's a great looking guy. Everyone loves him. And why not have him rather than me? I mean, who the hell needs me on the back cover?
Well, I guess I can see the point, right? Like, my neighborhood book club probably wouldn't pick up the book on the merits of your photo, but
right. Who the hell needs to see me? I mean, I look like a duck. They don't need to see me. But it's also just a sort of fun thing to do. I just thought, why not?
It is a fun thing.
Why the hell not?
I guess that you get this extra leverage and rope when you do comedy, right? Like you can get away with that.
Right. This isn't a 900-page book on the Holocaust, right? This is interviews with comedy writers. So the leeway is more, and you can have more fun with it. And I think more fun should be had. I think too many authors take themselves too seriously. There's no reason not to have fun with it.
Yeah, I personally use that these days as my own decision point. If I have 4 different book ideas, I'm probably going to write the one that feels the most fun right now.
Well, you have to. I mean, because the book will turn out better, and the readers will know that you felt this was the most fun. It just comes through. It comes across.
Yeah. So how did Passable in Pink come about? That seems like feels like, from looking outside in, it feels like a departure from.
Well, not too much, because what I wanted to do after I wrote the novelization to the imaginary 70s movie, I wanted to do the same thing for an 80s movie. And I thought the perfect way in would be a John Hughes type of movie, because these are the movies I grew up watching as a kid, and I've recently tried to show them to my daughter, who is 11, and it was like watching something from 100 years ago. It just felt very off. So I thought that would be a good thing to, sort of sink my teeth into. There's a lot of jokes. There's a lot of satirical elements you can do about the difference between movies then and the way we treated teenagers then and women then versus now.
Yeah,
I just thought it was rich enough for that. So I wrote that book, put it out, and that got bought by Audible. And then, once someone comes on board, in this case it was Gillian Jacobs, and then other people start coming aboard, Adam Scott and Bobby Moynihan and Bob Odenkirk and Ray Seahorn, Lorraine Newman, Judd Nelson. So, I mean, it was just a fun project, which is why I put out a third book, novelization. That's coming out in about a month. It's called Slouchers. and that is on
Like
Amazon.
Slackers.
Yeah, it's 1992 Gen X type of movie, Singles, Reality Bites, Clerks,
Yeah.
that sort of
You and I are clearly of a generation. And
yeah, yeah. I always hated those sort of movies, those Gen X movies, and this sort of takes
yeah, me
this out.
too. It didn't help my dating life at all.
Well, nothing helped my dating life, but this sort of depressed me because even at that time when I had no job, I wasn't even as accomplished as the slackers. I was doing nothing, so I felt bad within even that context. And I watched those movies again recently, and they do not age well.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Every once in a while, you get like this cool bonus soundtrack that stands above the movie. Like,
Well, right. I mean, Pump Up the Volume is an example of that. Great soundtrack. Like the movie at the time, can't stand it now. But yeah, music was a big part of my life then. I was working in a record store, and it's a big part of those movies, and then a big part of this book, Slouchers. The main character is a Matt Dillon type of character from Singles, a grunge singer.
Yeah. And so how do you have you thought about that? Like, how do you incorporate that music and love of music into the written word?
Well, it has to come through the characters, and I think it has to be of its time. You can't look back. I mean, you are looking back with today's eyes, but the way that these bands were written about at the time in Spin Magazine or Pulse Magazine through Tower Records or Rolling Stone was just so wide-eyed and wondrous.
Yes.
That I sort of find interesting now because most of the music was just garbage.
I remember that at the time, feeling that way at the time.
Yeah, right. It was obvious. But so much of it beyond Nirvana and Pearl Jam was just marketing crap, and I try to make fun of that. But I do put in real references, and I also deal with like the high fidelity thing that sort of bugs me. I worked in a record store for 10 years, and whenever I tell people that, they say, "Oh, is it like high fidelity?" It's like, no, it's definitely not like high fidelity. High fidelity to me, with all the lists and all that record store cliche, it bothers me. It just annoys me. So I created a character in there who's sort of like the John Cusack character in High Fidelity, but much, much more annoying. So a lot of the stuff that I do like to write about is either stuff that bothers me in a political sense or just bothers me in a personal standpoint. It just annoys me. I want to make fun of that. Like in this case, it would be the elitism of what you would see in High Fidelity of record store clerks. I never liked that elitism. I saw a lot of people try to adopt it after that movie came out. So that's one of the characters that I write about. And hopefully it's clear that I am not a fan of that type of
Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Like thinking about, so you've been doing this a while, like the purpose, like underlying intent when you write these days are like, the one, it sounds like there's some sort of catharsis to go after these topics and maybe you have a lot to say. Are you hoping to change somebody's mind or to connect with people who feel the same way that you do? Or
I think a little bit of both. But I think it is like I write not out of anger, but annoyance a lot of times. And if something annoys me, I do want to make fun of it. Now, this is not going to change the world, but maybe if someone didn't grow up in the early 90s and reads this book, they might come to these Gen X movies differently. They might see that it was not like it was in the movies, that it was just this, vision of a screenwriter who probably never worked in a record store or skated in a abandoned parking lot or whatever. A lot of it was just fictional as a Disney movie.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but I'm not out there to try to change the entire world's viewpoint on these movies. It's just something that annoys me. And I like to write when annoyed. I mean, some people like to write when mad.
Yeah.
I think that sort of is too powerful. A thing that overpowers your work. But I think and with comedy, I think to be annoyed is a good thing, a healthy thing.
Yeah. Do you find yourself curious, like exploring, trying to find explanations for why something is the way it is, why people are doing what they do?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have any answers for why anyone would vote for Trump. What would interest me is creating a character who would vote for Trump and why that specific character would vote for Trump. I don't think that that type of character is going to change anyone voting. It's just me sort of putting it out there. Like, to me, this is the type of person who would vote for Trump, and this is why. And I don't think he is correct. I don't think he's intelligent. From a comedic standpoint, there's a lot that you can get away with, but I don't think it's going to change anyone's minds. That's part of the problem, I think, with late night TV. It's just become white noise, where there's too many jokes. There's so many jokes. I don't think it's moved the needle one iota for any voter. I think you go to jokes like you would go to op-ed pages. You read what reinforces your already pre-existing idea.
Yeah.
And I think that the power of good comedy, which I think I saw recently in Borat, like, to me, it was like, okay, I can see someone watching this and them being changed politically a little bit. I can't see that happening listening to a Stephen Colbert joke. I just don't know anyone who is going to change their mind from listening to a late night joke these days.
There's something more immersive about sitting still for an hour or two, right? Versus a 4-minute setup and.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, when you look at Letterman or any late night show from the 80s, it seems like it's 5 times slower. I mean, everything moves so much slower. So when you see a late night now, it's all geared towards YouTube clips. It's all geared towards being shown on Vulture.
Right. Or being shared as a 30-second clip on Instagram feed.
It's not something, I kind of feel for those writers who have to do that. Not only do that, but to have to think about Trump every day. I mean, I would lose my mind. That's not why I went into comedy writing, and I'm imagining that's not why they went in either, to think about this toxic presence every single day and knowing that you're really not making much of a difference. To me, that would be very, very frustrating.
Yeah, sounds like a character to explore.
Well, there you go. And actually, I am exploring it. I'm writing a memoir of a comedy writer.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That could get dark. How are you gonna walk that line?
By showing that he is not on the right side. He is. He's gone to the dark side.
Well, do you have? That's exciting. And so, I guess I should ask, like, what's motivating you now to keep going? Like,
not much, truthfully. I mean,
and that's it's okay to have a
I
grounded answer there.
I am very anxious. I am very disappointed with how things are going. I'm not an optimist. Really, the only reason I keep writing is because I feel I have to. I suffer from depression and anxiety and OCD. So the only way for me to not feel that is one of 3 ways. One is alcohol, the other is exercise, and the third is writing. And if I don't do it every day, I'd like to avoid alcohol, but exercise and writing is really the only way I can avoid that. And if I don't, then I'm an absolute mess. So I really feel I have to do it. It's almost like a medicine.
Yeah.
It's a very strong energy. And if I don't focus that anxiety and depression into something positive, I think I would circle the drain very, very quickly.
Yeah. Sounds like a perk that you can get paid for that then, if it has that much personal benefit, right?
Yeah. I mean, the life is miserable, but at least there is an end product that comes from that, and in my case, hopefully it's just producing day after day after day, rather than, doing something else in an OCD sense. At least this is the power that's pushing towards a positive outcome.
Yeah.
Something will be produced.
So how are you handling staying connected and maybe having some of that collaboration vibe right now with things as they are, like with.
You mean missing out on the collaboration?
Well, I don't know if you're missing out or not, but obviously times are strange and travel's difficult, and
Yeah, I think it takes me back to a time I didn't like in my early 20s where I was too isolated. I don't think it's healthy for you as a person or as a writer. And I see too much isolation. And I think everyone's sort of losing their minds because they're in their own little bubbles. And I don't think it's a good situation for writers or anyone. And I think that people are sort of at the end of their tethers. And I think if the election turns out differently in a week, then I hope it will. I'm wondering, and I fear that there's going to be a lot of a bad outcome for a number of writers as far as depression and suicide and that sort of thing. I really am hopeful that things will turn out differently, but I just see a possibility for darkness, and it scares me.
Yeah. So what can we do to be supportive of our community then right now?
I think it is, whether it's I think to reaching out, whether it's by a phone call, email, text, to just remind people they're not forgotten. That's really the fear I think most people have in life, is to be forgotten. And it's a big fear. It's very hardwired.
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of people, especially in comedy, they may feel that. So, I mean, if there's someone out there whose work you like and you haven't heard from them in a while, reach out to them. Tell them that their work means a lot. I can guarantee you that will make their week. I mean, it doesn't take much. And I do feel we have to remain strong and go through this together. It's just madness. But I think if your heart is in the right place and you feel you're moving forward with a group that's also going towards a positive place, that has helped me. But I do think, and the isolation aspect is very disturbing to me. I think people can spin away very, very quickly.
Yeah. I get that. And maintaining community, it seems like social media is probably not the best way to keep in touch with people right now.
I don't think so. I think it's really not. I mean, it doesn't compare with going out and just meeting people you wouldn't have met otherwise. I think it can be too self-referential on social media. You're talking to the same 10 people day after day after day. I think you do need to meet different people from different backgrounds, different experiences. It's just healthy. And especially if you're into comedy. And I think living a life and experiencing the world is extremely important, and it's really been knocked down a peg this past year. And I think it's, I just hope it doesn't keep continuing.
Yeah. And, I should ask, it kind of ties in maybe, you've written for a lot of magazines and newspapers and that kind of thing, doing, I don't know how you view it, like whether it's gig work or, little jobs, but I imagine there's relationships that you develop over time, right? In that process, and some sort of value beyond just being in print
right. I mean, if your goal is just to be in print, it will not change your life, I can guarantee you.
So what's some of the value you've gotten out of doing that type of work?
Writing for print?
Yeah, or work for hire kind of things, those kind of things.
Well, one is that you have, typically in print, you have what you want on the page. You're not writing for a TV show or a movie where it may be rewritten by 15 different writers. So the money is going to be less, but you're going to have more power. Also, you have something that's tangible that lasts. And I think myself, like most people, don't want to disappear, and they want something out there when they're gone. Having something in print does that. I mean, you look at the hundreds of thousands of hours of radio waves that have disappeared, or TV shows. I think there's something very permanent about print, even though who knows whether it'll be all digital in the future or not. I think there's something, especially permanent about magazines and books, where you can keep those for a very long time. You can pass them on to another generation. And one of the frustrations for me, if I were to write, and I have written some for TV and radio and other things, is that it just disappears. Off it goes like a wisp held out the window. And I think there is something to be said for someone stumbling across your work. And that has happened where someone has stumbled across a book or an article or this or that in the library or bookstore. And it's meant a lot, that someone came across something they wouldn't have come across otherwise. There's just so much stimuli out there. To rise above it with something that has a solid presence, to me, is important.
Mm. Mm. I like that. And if there's change tags one more time, since I think we're pretty much up against time, but who's your hero these days? Do you still have a hero, like in the business, or an inspiration, like kind of a North Star?
Yeah, I have a few. David Sedaris, Bob Odenkirk, Meryl Marco, and Ian MacKaye. Now, Ian MacKaye is the lead singer of Fugazi and Minor Threat, and he's also the owner of Dischord Records. And when I was growing up in D.C. in the 80s and 90s, that was a really impressive thing to see, because it was not a creative city. So to do what Ian was doing, to put out a product that he was happy with and to make a living at it, was almost magical. So that had a big influence on me, and it still does. And with the rest of them, David and Bob and Meryl, they are very singular, very individual, and they just keep moving forward. And they've created and carved out careers that I think are very, very interesting. Never losing sight of, never giving up their own voice, and always just sort of producing great work consistently without festering and stagnating. And I think that's very important.
How many of these heroes have you been able to meet?
I met them all. The four I just mentioned, I've been lucky enough to have met. If I can tell anyone any advice, it would be to reach out to those people whose work you like. It's not as hard as you might think, and they may not get back to you, but if you reach out to them not wanting something except to interview them, to ask their advice, rather than saying, hey, give me a job, but more like can I talk to you about your experience, I think a lot of them will get back to you. And I think it's a very important thing to do, is to learn what worked for others and what didn't work for them. I mean, save yourself some time and energy. Find out what didn't work, so maybe you don't have to go down that career path. Also, it shows you that these are just normal people who have worked and continue to work very, very hard. And they're not magical, and they're not extra special in any specific way. Beyond that, they're very talented. They had a talent. They put their minds to it. They set forth on this, off this beaten track, and they've kept at it. And because of that, they've become successful and are certainly happier than they would have been if they had, say, gone into accounting or something. It's been an interesting lives for these people. I think that's important to see, not just those who don't make it, but you really do have to reach out to those who have made it and see that it is a possibility. It's not an impossibility, that anyone can do it. It just takes hard work and drive.
So having talked to your heroes and having had your own experiences now, do you have a solid idea of what success personally means for you?
I think the success is not monetarily based necessarily. I mean, you have to make a career, and if that involves having a 2-track system where you have one job to pay for insurance and food, you should allow yourself to do what you want to do, how you want to do it, and you shouldn't have to answer to anyone. If something doesn't feel right to you, don't do it. One genre or one format is no more important than the next. You don't have to write short stories for New Yorker. You can write funny pieces for yourself. You can write graphic novels. You don't have to write for the stage. You can write for stand-up. So whatever interests you is no less important than any other thing. I think what is most important is to satisfy your soul, where at the end of the day, you're content with what you've produced. And I think, to me, or rather than making a lot of money writing for a sitcom you don't want to write for necessarily, is to put out what you want and how you want it to look. And to have that control is very important. And for me, at the end of the day, putting out these articles, putting out these books, putting out these audiobooks, that to me makes me the most fulfilled, even though I'm not rich from it. But you meet interesting people from it, and good things happen when you put out stuff that you are happy with. I mean, that's why you got into writing to begin with, not to write jokes for shit my father says. You know, you got into it because it interested you and you wanted to put out what you wanted to put out. And I think in the end, that is the most important thing. I mean, no amount of money can compare with it.
That's great. Well, Mike, for people who want to know more about you, how can they find you?
MikeSachs.com, also on Amazon or other book sites. The new book is called Slouchers. And the last
By the time this comes out, it might be out. What's the release date?
The release date is December 8th, but it'll be on sale in about a week, right after the election, for better or for worse.
Okay, so on pre-order.
Yeah.
Cool.
You know what? And also, my email's online. And reach out to me if you want. I don't mind at all talking to people. I never understood, someone saying, "Oh, I don't have time to write an email back." Really? You don't have time to write to someone? It doesn't take much.
Yeah.
And I like meeting new people. So, I am certainly reachable out there, and maybe I'll hear from you.
Well, cool. I did.
Exactly. Right.
That's why we're here.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Mike, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of The Fearless Storyteller. As a reminder, any and all links can be found in the show notes. And if you're enjoying this podcast, will you please consider leaving a review? By doing so, you'll be helping new listeners discover the Fearless Storyteller podcast.